just in case anybody missed the names and roles of the people on stage, this is Silvia Albarella, who is a stage designer for both theatre and some film projects. Susanna Marianne, who has worked as a film producer, and Dominik Stockhausen, who is a VR director of Sonar, which has been shown in this festival. So I'll just pass it over to the people on stage and allow them to introduce themselves in more detail.
So, hello. I am a stage designer, and I've been living in Berlin since about 20 years, where I started in a very classical theater, stage theater to work with a very classic black box. And since about 10 years, I've been working in independent theater, where I'm more free to design how to the audience can be part of the performance, because most of the theater where I work have this possibility to change the position of the chairs and something like that. And very, very seldom, about 12 years ago, I have started to work for a film set, and this is a completely other job in compared to stage designer. I would explain to work I have worked in the last years, where my first idea or part of the concept of the performance was how the audience can participate to this project. Well, when I design a set, of course, my question is what the people see. And sometimes I really like to build sets a little bit complicated with perspectives and mirrors and reflections. So often when the people sit on the left side of the audience space, they saw another piece in complaint to people they sit on the opposite side. For example, a couple of years ago, I worked on a choreography piece, and in the middle of the stage, it was a corridor, and the people on the left side could see the corridor through the mirror in the corridor, and the people of the right side couldn't see another piece. And I found very interesting because, in fact, people has to come several times and see different pieces. Then I had also piece where I both a row in L form. So it was because I wanted the people be in the stage place, which was designed like a living room. And yes, I don't know if I'm speaking too much now, just to because which is the connection of a stage designer here with the audience. There's a lot of connection. So thank you.
Yes, hello. So my name is Susanna, and I've been producing feature films for an international cinema market for about 12 years. And I would guess that the films I've been involved in, you would think they're like hardcore art house movies with directors like Ulrich Seidel or Roy Andersson or Shirin Neshat. And I think what's sort of interesting in the film world is that it stayed unchanged for a long, long time, and the interface of where films meet the audience, the cinema experience, has changed, has remained unchanged for a very, very long time. You go in, you buy a ticket, you might want to queue for a beer and popcorn, and then you watch the movie and you're let out of the cinema. And the same is true about more or less the production of films. There is very little possibility for audiences to interact with the content of the movie. Over the past maybe 15 years, 10 years, maybe Sylvia knows better, but in the theater space, there have emerged a lot of companies that do extremely immersive things, and that can be Punch Drunk in London, or Sleep No More in New York, or Rimini Protocol, or Signa in Europe. And these types of experiences, they sort of break the fourth wall between the audience and the piece. And it seems to me that since we all now live a life in the digital space where we have a social life on Facebook or Snapchat or WhatsApp or wherever, and we also have a life in the real world, that whenever we do something in the real world, we have a different expectation to what this is, what we do in the real world. We are more looking for an experience than just consuming something. And this sort of reflects on what's happening in the cinema world. So especially for independent films, audience numbers are dropping in the segment of younger people. And I think with the emergence of virtual reality, there is opening a new space where you can actually interact between what you see and where you are. And at this moment in time in virtual reality, in the film space, we have not yet discovered how to use it, and maybe Dominic is a better person to explain this.
Yeah, so I'm Dominic. I am a director and a CG artist, so I come from traditional 3D animated movies, and I kind of found my way into VR 1.5 years ago. Philip Maas, my co-director, and I, we've been working on this idea, which would going to be a sci-fi film, sort of an homage to all those great sci-fi classics from the late 60s to maybe the early 80s, Blade Runner, Alien, and all that, 2001, of course. And we started out creating, like going into pre-production for a traditional movie that we wanted to make, and then I think in mid-2014 we got our hands on the DK1, the first developer kit of Oculus, and we thought, damn it, we have to make it in VR, because the whole story that we wanted to tell and the setting that we put it into, and especially the emotions that we wanted to evoke for the audience would actually be pushed incredibly more by telling it in 360 degrees. So we kind of started out on this experiment to take what we know from traditional movie making and try to deliver that sort of cinematic feeling that we all know from watching a movie, going to the cinema. Just that whole mindset that we are in expectation of watching a story that is being told by someone to us. We wanted to incorporate that into virtual reality. So we didn't work. Sonar is not made out of an engine. It's not in real time. So you actually, apart from the ability to look where you want to look, there is no real interaction. So it's the whole movie is entirely pre-rendered. So yeah, of course, for us as movie makers, that was quite an experience to try to get a balance between incorporating that freedom for the audience to explore the space around them, and on the other hand, directing these moments where we can steer the gaze of the audience in order to keep the story progressing. Yeah, as I said, it was an experiment. We did learn a lot. I think, and that's why I'm excited to be here and to be part of that panel, is that I have a little theater background. I've been studying media and theater theory before I came to Ludwigsburg at the Film Academy where I'm studying at the moment. And I did a little bit of acting myself on stage, and I think that's the experiences that I made, like acting on stage and moving on stage and sort of shaping the space around you by the movements you make and all that. I think that informs the work that I did on Sonar, or at least I tried to, in a way, incorporate that sense of how do you deal with space instead of, you know, the flattened image that you have in traditional movie making. So yeah, I think this is a great venue to sort of get this technological world, the movie making world, and the theater world together, and try to see where is the, you know, the convergences and what can the one medium maybe push that the other one cannot.
Okay, I guess I'll follow up on that and sort of ask a little bit at first about sort of the aesthetic side of, or about the visual side of it, and about the vocabulary that we get coming from film and coming from sort of traditional theatre that takes place on a stage where the audience is sitting, you know, facing the stage, and they have a viewpoint that's varied but not so much as in virtual reality. What happens, or how could we be thinking about developing a new vocabulary in that way, or what could we be also thinking about in terms of how much control we give to the viewer? Do we give them complete control, or do we do, such as Dominic mentioned from his film, sort of develop a camera that gives a certain amount of control in 360 degree, but sort of guides them through the experience? I wonder if Susanna, maybe you would have anything to say about what you could imagine happening?
I guess in VR, we're sort of at the moment, shortly after the Lumiere brothers had their first movie shown with the train entering a station and people running away because they're thinking the train is going to run over them. And it took cinema 25 years to develop its own distinct vocabulary that was different from just filming theater. And in VR, most of the films that I have seen until now, they are still using VR as film used theater in the early 1910s. And it didn't yet develop a very strong vocabulary. And the question of how much agency can you give the viewer? How does the viewer move in space? And how can you tell a story if le regard of the spectator is not guided by the director or the DOP that clearly outline what you're seeing next? And maybe that I would be really interested, Dominic, if you could tell me or us how you went about this in your film.
Yeah. First of all, I absolutely agree with that. I think that we're right at the beginning. Basically, I'd argue that no one at the moment is really knowing what they're doing, because, as you said, there is no, like, compared to films, there is no language that we know that we can use, and I mean this goes both ways. There is no real, like, compared to filmmaking, I know what I can do with editing. I know what I can do with focusing attention by staging and layout and all that. That's totally different in VR. And on the other side, on the receiving side, there is no patterns and there is no uniformed language that the audience can read. Just as much as I know when to go into a detail shot and all that, that's something that the audience is used to being able to read, and they know what it means. It's some sort of a common language that we communicate in. And that absolutely has to be established in VR, I think. So it's an interesting conflict that I actually find myself in when I'm working on new ideas, trying to do a VR project, is that I myself think very much in like those movie patterns. It's just because, you know, all of us grew up with that way of seeing movie and that way in which movies deliver stories. So when I think of something that I want to tell, it automatically pops up in all these, in this movie grammar in my head. So with these, I automatically think about you know, the depth of field, where to put the focus and all that stuff, which is something that does not work in VR. So it takes some time to get used to just that space around you and to get a feeling for what it means to to actually work with the space that you have in between, not only with your actors, and this is something that I think can be found in theater very much, what it means to not just work with the actors and the set design that you have and all that, but to sort of acknowledge the space that surrounds everything as a protagonist too, in a way. So yeah, it's a wild field to be working in at the moment, because you basically have all the freedoms to try to contribute to what this language is going to be, that we're going to be stories in. And then on the other hand, what kind of stories will there be? Because a lot of things that we see at the moment are, pretty much still adaptations from cinematic telling to VR, instead of like unique stories that actually need that medium to be told. So yeah, I'm not sure if that made any sense, but
I think it did, absolutely. I was just wondering while you were speaking about how it might be possible to use lighting in a 3D setting the way that shots in cinema are used to direct attention. So to light certain things where the viewer is supposed to be looking at that point, or perhaps even playing with that and tricking them to a certain extent. This is sort of directed towards, I suppose, Sylvia and Dominic, as you both worked with lighting in different capacities in your work, whether you think that could be a possible avenue that filmmakers could take?
Well, I don't have a lot of experience in the three-dimensional computer VR, but I think this is very important. The light is part of the stage, so I can't think it's something others. And what you say is very important, because in theater, the very big difference from theater and film is the audience has all the time the whole picture in front of the eyes, and every person can decide what they want to see, which is the concentration. And in film, you decided for the audience. This is the very, very big difference, and this is, I think, the point. And what for me is very interesting is how to use video on stage with this contrast. Yes, and I have another question maybe for later, because I don't know if you have experience in game design, because I had a student, I prepare him for the school game design, and in the preparation, it was the exactly same preparation as a stage designer. It's exactly the same, just at the end, it's all virtually. And but I don't have such of experience.
That is definitely something that I would have loved to have more experience in what it means to create a set actually in 360 degree, or to have the audience, to have your set exposed to the audience at every time from every angle, because when we did Sonar, we did encounter these moments that we still tried to, the main action was happening in the one area. So this area would be a little bit more, let's say, polished or a little bit more interesting than the rest of the environment. But yeah, some of the feedback we got is people like spotting little, let's call them not errors, but like little areas of the whole piece that weren't that polished and that weren't like just roughly okay. We have to get through with it, and I mean you have that openness to the audience at all times, and to come back to the lighting thing, I think it can work very similar to theater. We've been working a lot with contrasts in Sonar to try to highlight the areas of importance, and in a way you even have kind of a framing, because you always have this 110 or whatever degree field of view, so you actually can in a way work with staging in VR. There's this moment in Sonar when you are in. It's basically the story of an asteroid that sends out some kind of a distress call, and then there's a drone picking up that call, and we follow that drone to discover what's going on, what the source of everything is. So there's this moment when we are in the cockpit and we have found sort of the source of the signal, and then we send out this little rover that is going to explore the place of interest, which is pretty far away. So we put this monitor on the top left corner of the audience that would transmit the signal, and the monitor was positioned in a way that if you look straight ahead, you will see just in the corner of your eye, you'll see this, the light from the monitor and all that. So and that'll draw your attention towards it. So you have kind of a very rough frame that you can work with. But other than that, I think lighting is a very very important aspect. Contrast, like in total.
Okay. Something else that I'm really interested in and that I wanted to ask all of you was what you think about the importance of the environment outside of the virtual environment that you enter in the headset, and how important it is to guide the viewer through into the environment rather than sort of throwing them in the deep end immediately and not giving them any information, or whether it's important to have a space that sort of mimics a little bit the space that you'll be inside in the virtual environment, or whether there could be some sort of dialogue between the two.
So I was thinking about this question, and this is interesting because I don't think we need something like this, because I have remember the most interesting thing I've seen, for example, in the Venice Art Biennale, which the outside place is just a garden. And so it's in cinema or in theater, there's just foyer with a bar or something like that. But which I think is very important is the inside part. If this is a cinema, it's just not a screen, but I think it's like the audience place is also very important. For theater is much more. So I think the concentration in the inside space must be at the same level the exhibition place and the audience place. But outside, I don't really think we need.
I think I think you don't. Yeah, as you said, you don't really need it. I think as soon as as the experience, and whether this be on stage in a theater production or in a virtual production, I think if the experience is crafted well enough, audiences tend to forget where they are. I think that is the main goal that we can achieve in storytelling. In theater, the same probably as in movie making. That moment that you actually do get immersed, the moment that you actually feel what is going on the screen or in the 3D space around you. And for me, it's always kind of the part I enjoy most whenever I show Sonar to someone is actually the part when they come out of it again, because VR has that sensation that people really do get lost in where they are. And since you have these, very clunky headsets and they shut you out from everything, then you put your over-ear headphones on, and so you're isolated for 6 minutes. And it's funny to see people to come out of that and to come out into the real world again, which always seems to me like some kind of a waking up thing. Actually, it's this remembering, oh right, I'm here, I'm not in space, or I'm not in wherever that is. So I too think that it's the outside space can maybe give you a smoother introduction to the experience, to like get you into the mood of everything. But I think if the experience is crafted well enough, it can stand on its own.
Do you think it could be interesting to make it very different and make it a sort of very abrupt switch in certain stories from the outside to the inside, and vice versa? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's funny to see, because these VR experiences are shown most of the time in sort of these environments. It's like these, convention environments or festivals, and so you have a lot of people running around, and no one actually, or I assume that most of the people aren't actually, they're not prepared for what is coming their way, especially if it's an emotional content or something like that. I think it's very interesting to see that transition happening from, okay, I'm here in this space, there's a lot of people, I'm not very private, it's a very open situation, everyone can see me, then I put on these headphones, and of course I know probably I look stupid, there's people taking pictures of me all around, but then there's this transition when they sort of drop into the experience and they forget all that. And I think if you sort of create that environment that you're going to be in, I think that can provide a pretty strong impact on you.
I wanted to add something, and that is, at the moment, most VR films are very short. They're between 6 and 10 minutes, and it feels a bit like a moment in what used to be in a fair, when you just go in like a tent and you try something strange and then you come out again. But I think when films start to be longer and the technical development is far enough so that we don't get motion sick, it might be interesting, and this is just guessing, but since you're sort of like a lonely watcher in your VR gear with the headphones and earphones, it might be a necessity for people that when they do come out, that there is like a spot where you want to just hang out, and maybe this is something that could be really nice to provide in VR cinemas. I don't know.
I think discussing the experience is really important, because it's always so subjective, and you have such a subjective experience of the author's work, and also the author's work is very much a sharing of the subjective view, where they've created a world. Just while you were both speaking, I was thinking a little bit about the way that people look from the outside when they're inside the virtual world, and especially now that there are the Vive headsets with the hand motion. I was wondering whether you find the sort of performative aspects about this interaction interesting to a certain extent, or whether it could also become a part of the work, or part of the story could be, the action of the body as it is inside the environment, or whether that's taking it a little bit too far. Or
I absolutely think it's an interesting thing to look into. To start off, the funny thing that I see with all these VR stuff going on at the moment is especially with the Samsung Gear VR, which is, if you think about it, it actually is insane. It is people putting their smartphone, like strapping it actually right in front of their eyes. So I think that is a very, if you think about it, it's a very strange behavior. Why would you always, I've been growing up with, that, oh, don't sit too close to the television, your eyes will get hurt and all that. And what are we doing now? We're putting the screens right in front of our faces, which is strange behavior. So why not examine that? And the interesting thing about watching people behaving in a virtual space, I think, is that you really, especially as you said with the hand controls, the touch controllers, and all that, there is sort of an intuitiveness to it that is actually pretty amazing to watch people. They strap on all that gear and you have kilos of technology on your body and you're heaving it around, but then at one point you see that people start behaving as if there was no technology attached to them. There are experiences that are made for two persons, and it's funny to see, because if you watch them, you don't see what they see, you don't see the space that they're in, but they start relating to each other, turning to each other when they're talking to each other and all that, but having all these gear strapped around them, and that feels very strange because they are part of a reality that we are not at the moment. And yeah, I think it's very interesting actually to examine that sort of behavior, that natural behavior that comes at a certain point.
And in terms of what you were saying about strapping the phone to the eyes, I think that this is really interesting because it's sort of, VR is almost the point where we've entered the screen. We're inside the screen, like the way that we intuitively tried to when we were children, and we're back in something called reality, virtual reality. We're kind of back in theatre somehow, back to the basics. I find that a really interesting thing to explore in terms of what the basic human desire behind that is. It's a really interesting question, I think. But just back to the topic, I was wondering a little bit about production and financing and how that changes with VR, because there's the hierarchy that's lost from the sort of the shots that you make in film, but there's also to a certain extent the loss of the hierarchy of the DOP and the lighting and the electricians, and to a certain extent with the VR projects that I've seen, everybody's sort of doing a little bit of everything, and sort of everybody's sort of engineering their own cameras and sort of coming up with everything quite an improvised way. Whether it could be necessary to look for those hierarchies again and to organize production on VR in a way that sort of streamlines everything, or whether that's something, this sort of inventiveness is something that should really be focused on and developed as a mode of working and as an approach.
Yeah, I guess it's at the moment VR is not a business because there is no standards yet, and there is no distribution channels yet that actually are financially viable. And I think as soon as this becomes financially interesting, automatically there will be different structures. At the moment, I think is very independent and everybody's working. There is lots of people sharing ideas. There is lots of, as Dominic said, it's mostly happening in film festivals or other sort of congregations interested in the digital life. As far as financing, there is of course the big Silicon Valley companies that invest heavily in the development of VR. And in Europe, it is more an independent space of artistic expression. And as far as film funds that support most of the filmmaking in Europe, they have not yet established any structures where VR has a place.
Yeah, this is quite problematic in Germany and I think in other places in Europe as well, that the conventions of film are very much enforced on artistic projects. And then there is the sort of media financing and the sort of financing that's placed there to sort of propel media forward, and sometimes those are they sort of require a very commercial project, and that's already very difficult in VR because there isn't really a model that exists, and so there are certain projects that really fall between the cracks, and it becomes a big problem. But just I also wanted to come back to you, Sylvia, to ask you about the corridor that you were speaking about with the mirror. I didn't see the piece, obviously, but it made me think about how it would be possible to use that in VR and craft very different viewer experiences. Have you thought a little about how you could adapt it?
I think maybe. Sometimes I try without technical, so without video on stage, to do the same. I want to decide what the audience can see. So, and that's, I think sometimes I decided to build something just the half of the audience can see, and the other part can see in the mirror. It was the cue of the thing, because it was a huge space, and in the middle it was this corridor, and one side was with a mirror, so I think the right could see in the mirror, and the left side directly in the corridor, but next to this corridor it was also a room, so the people on the left could see direct the room, so live, but the people on the other side couldn't, because the corridor was there, and but at the opposite it was also a mirror, so they also saw a mirror space. So it was a little bit an experimental. Because I think I started 2003 to design for film, and I think I want to do the DAP job really, because they decided to do the Bühnenbild, what we call Bühnenbild in German, stage design. They decided for the audience. I think I try, but without. Camera on stage, because when I have the camera on stage, it's not more. For me, it's another interesting. I love to work with video on stage. I love really, but in completely other way. Not for a point of view, not for the view of the audience.
And so on either side of the corridor, the experiences of the viewers were very different?
Oh, yeah.
Did it change the story for each of the viewers?
Yeah, but it changed, but we had a tour, and it was completely interesting, because when we played in Berlin, I had about 4 meters between the first row and the stage where the play was, and it was a huge distance, so you couldn't see all the stuff of the stage design like an objet d'art. And then we had a tour in a very small theater. And so the audience was direct sitting on stage. And it's worked to my idea, because it was interesting. Yes. So it's every time we play in another place is different. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that actually it's about time for us to close the discussion anyway. I'd like to thank everybody who was on the panel today, Sylvia, Susanna, and Dominic. Looking forward to hearing more about all of your projects soon.